Welcome back. By the early 2000s, peace felt further away than ever. Violence, mistrust, and failed negotiations shaped both Israeli and Palestinian life, setting the stage for a new and uncertain chapter. Politically, moderates were marginalized. In Israel, the peace camp collapsed, and Ariel Sharon, seen once as an inflammatory figure, was elected prime minister in 2001 amid calls for security. In the Palestinian arena, Arafat was increasingly isolated and besieged, at one point literally, as Israel confined him in his Ramallah headquarters. The U.S., under President George W. Bush, initially disengaged from peace efforts, especially after the 9/11 attacks refocused U.S. priorities and cast Palestinian militancy in the same light as global terrorism. Eventually, the U.S. did propose a roadmap for peace in 2003, but it went largely unimplemented. By 2004, the Intifada was winding down, exhausted by its own destructiveness. That November, Yasser Arafat died in Paris of an illness, after decades as the embodiment of the Palestinian struggle. His passing marked the end of an era. The Palestinian Authority leadership passed to Mahmoud Abbas, who opposed the militarization of the Intifada and favored negotiations. A ceasefire was gradually restored by 2005. Both societies were profoundly scarred. Palestinians saw their hopes for statehood dashed and towns in ruins. Israelis, while militarily victorious, felt the agony of suicide bombings and feared that even offered peace deals would be met with bloodshed. The Second Intifada's legacy was deep mistrust, but it also convinced some leaders that the status quo was untenable. In a surprising turn, one of the Intifada's chief villains in Palestinian eyes, Ariel Sharon, would soon make a unilateral move that reshaped Gaza's fate. In 2005, Israel made a momentous decision with far-reaching consequences for Gaza and internal Palestinian politics. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, a hardliner who had aggressively fought the Intifada, shocked friend and foe by proposing Israel's unilateral disengagement from the Gaza Strip. In August 2005, Israel withdrew all its troops and evacuated all its settlements from Gaza, ending its 38-year direct presence there. About 21 settlements and 9,000 Israeli settlers were pulled out of Gaza, some forcibly dragged away by Israeli soldiers in dramatic scenes of tears and resistance. Along with Gaza, Sharon also dismantled 4 small settlements in the northern West Bank, though the West Bank overall remained under tight Israeli control. The world watched in astonishment as the architect of some settlement policies now removed settlers for the first time. Sharon argued that holding on to impoverished, densely populated Gaza was a strategic liability and that Israel would be better off without it. The United States supported the move, while Palestinians had mixed feelings, relief that the settlers and bases were gone, but skepticism about Israel's motives and the lack of coordination with the PA. When Israel's withdrawal was complete, September 2005, Gaza technically was no longer occupied. Israel retained control over Gaza's airspace, coastal waters, and border crossings, except Rafah, which was given temporarily to PA control under an agreement. The Palestinian Authority assumed governance of Gaza, but little was done to rebuild its economy before a political earthquake hit. Hamas, which had gained popularity through its Intifada attacks and grassroots charity networks, decided to participate in politics. In January 2006, the first Palestinian legislative elections in a decade were held, under international pressure for reform and democracy. To general surprise, Hamas won a majority, defeating the long-dominant Fatah Party, Arafat's party, now led by Abbas. This election revealed Palestinians' frustration with Fatah's corruption and the failures of Oslo, and an endorsement, at least by some, of Hamas's defiance of Israel. However, the Hamas victory triggered immediate external and internal crises. Israel, the U.S., and EU labeled Hamas a terrorist organization and refused to deal with any PA government it led. Western aid to the PA was frozen, and Israel withheld tax revenues, aiming to undermine the new Hamas government. Tensions flared between Hamas and Fatah, which had very different visions and constituencies. Sporadic armed clashes erupted in Gaza between their loyalists through 2006. Efforts to form a unity government failed amid mutual distrust. In June 2007, This power struggle climaxed in factional warfare in Gaza. After a week of bloody street battles, Hamas forces routed Fatah's security apparatus in Gaza and took full control of the Gaza Strip by force. Fatah officials fled or were violently suppressed, some thrown from rooftops in infamous incidents. The Palestinian polity was now split in two. Hamas ruled Gaza, while Fatah, under President Mahmoud Abbas, governed the PA in the West Bank. This Fatah-Hamas split remains a fundamental schism to this day. The aftermath for Gaza was dire. Israel and Egypt, wary of Hamas, imposed a strict blockade on Gaza, controlling its borders, coast, and airspace. Essentially, Gaza became a 365-square-kilometer enclave sealed off from the world, its economy strangled, its residents, about 2 million by now, largely unable to leave, reliant on smuggling tunnels and limited aid. Hamas consolidated its rule, bolstered by an armed wing, the Qassam Brigades, and popular support from those who saw its resistance as honorable. Abbas's PA in the West Bank, conversely, engaged in security cooperation with Israel to clamp down on Hamas there, and continued negotiations, in fits and starts, toward a peace agreement that never materialized. This internal division weakened the Palestinian national movement, two rival governments claiming legitimacy, no unified strategy. Ordinary Palestinians felt the pain, especially Gazans, who endured increasing poverty and isolation, and West Bankers, who saw their dream of unity and statehood dim further. Meanwhile, Hamas's ascendance in Gaza set the stage for repeated cycles of violent conflict with Israel in the years ahead. In the aftermath of the split, the tiny Gaza Strip, so densely populated and fraught with militancy, became the flashpoint for repeated wars. With Hamas in control, rocket fire from Gaza into southern Israel, which had sporadically occurred since the early 2000s, intensified. Hamas and smaller factions, like Islamic Jihad, acquired rudimentary Qassam rockets and later Iranian-designed missiles capable of reaching major Israeli cities. Israel, asserting its right to self-defense, struck back hard each time. Over the past 15 years, Gaza and Israel have engaged in several devastating rounds of conflict. 2008 to 2009, Operation Cast Lead. After escalating rocket attacks and reciprocal strikes, Israel launched a massive 21-day military offensive into Gaza in December 2008. The Israeli Air Force pounded targets from the air, and ground troops pushed deep into Gaza's urban areas. Hamas fought back with guerrilla tactics, but was outmatched. The war killed some 1,400 Palestinians, including hundreds of civilians, and 13 Israelis, 3 civilians, according to human rights groups. Scenes of destruction, flattened neighborhoods, wrecked schools, including a UN school hit in error, drew international outrage. Israel said Hamas embedded fighters in civilian areas. Palestinians recounted horrific incidents of civilian deaths. A ceasefire was unilaterally declared in January 2009. Hamas emerged militarily weakened but still in power, and it claimed resistance victory by surviving. November 2012, Operation Pillar of Defense. Another flare-up occurred after Hamas fired rockets at Tel Aviv and Jerusalem for the first time, and Israel assassinated a top Hamas commander. This 8-day conflict saw intense Israeli airstrikes and hundreds of rockets launched from Gaza. Over 160 Palestinians and 6 Israelis were killed. Notably, during this round, Israel did not launch a ground invasion, and an Egyptian-mediated truce took hold relatively quickly. July-August 2014, Operation Protective Edge. This was the deadliest war since 1967 for Palestinians in Gaza. After the kidnapping and murder of 3 Israeli teens by a Hamas-linked cell and the revenge killing of a Palestinian teen, tensions ignited. Massive Israeli airstrikes began, followed by a ground incursion aimed at destroying Hamas's extensive tunnel networks that infiltrated into Israel. The fighting raged 50 days. Hamas fired thousands of rockets, mostly intercepted by Israel's new Iron Dome defense system or landing in open areas, and even managed commando raids via tunnels. Israel hammered Gaza from land, air, and sea. The toll: over 2,200 Palestinians killed. The UN said about 70% were civilians, and 73 Israelis killed, 67 soldiers, 6 civilians. Entire districts in eastern Gaza City and Rafah were turned to rubble. Images of children pulled from collapsed buildings filled TV screens. Civilians in southern Israel lived in bomb shelters for weeks. International efforts, including a U.S. and Egypt-brokered ceasefire, eventually ended the carnage. The 2014 war left Gaza in ruins, and a UN report later suggested both sides may have committed war crimes. May 2021, the 11-day war. Tensions in East Jerusalem, fueled by attempts to evict Palestinian families in Sheikh Jarrah and clashes at the Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan, finally boiled over. Hamas, presenting itself as defender of Jerusalem, fired a salvo of rockets toward Jerusalem on May 10, 2021. Israel responded with heavy airstrikes. For 11 days, Gaza was pummeled from the air while Hamas and Islamic Jihad launched over 4,000 rockets at Israeli cities, overwhelming Iron Dome at times. International concern mounted as an airstrike destroyed a tower housing media offices like Associated Press, Al Jazeera, and as Gaza casualties climbed. Around 260 Palestinians and 13 people in Israel were killed in that short span. A ceasefire mediated by Egypt took hold. This round showed Hamas's improved capabilities, longer-range rockets, drone attempts, and Israel's still lethal force, but importantly, the war triggered intercommunal unrest inside Israel itself. Mixed cities saw Jewish-Arab riots, underscoring the conflict's deep roots. 2023, the Gaza War. This was the most ferocious and transformative escalation in decades. On October 7, 2023, in a meticulously planned surprise attack, Hamas fighters breached the Gaza-Israel frontier by land, sea, and even motorized paraglider in a multi-pronged assault on adjacent Israeli communities. They overran military bases and kibbutzim, carrying out horrific massacres of civilians. More than 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilians, were killed in that single day, the deadliest day in Israel's history. Hamas gunmen also abducted around 240 hostages, men, women, children, elderly, dragging them into Gaza's labyrinth. The attack, shocking in scale and brutality, stunned Israel and the world. Israel declared war for the first time since 1973. What followed was an unprecedented Israeli onslaught on Gaza. The IDF subjected Gaza to continuous intensive bombardment, targeting Hamas infrastructure but also leveling entire neighborhoods. Ground forces entered Gaza later in October, engaging in fierce urban combat with Hamas militants. Casualty figures on the Palestinian side skyrocketed. By early June 2025, according to Gazan health officials, more than 54,000 Gazans had been killed in this war, a staggering toll, roughly 2% of Gaza's population. Massive devastation was wrought. An estimated 2/3 of all buildings in Gaza were damaged or destroyed, turning much of the territory into an apocalyptic landscape of rubble. Israel, too, paid a price. About 1,700 Israelis were killed in total, including the massacre victims and soldiers in subsequent fighting. A brief pause occurred in early 2025 with a ceasefire and hostage exchanges, mediated by regional and international players. But talks for a longer truce faltered and fighting resumed. The 2023 war marked a grim new chapter. Never had the conflict seen such high casualties in such a short time. The scale of destruction in Gaza and the unprecedented breach of Israel's defenses on October 7, 2023, shook the region's politics to the core. In Israel, anger and grief over the atrocities fueled calls to eliminate Hamas entirely. In Gaza and the broader Arab world, outrage at the humanitarian catastrophe sparked protests and difficult questions for Arab governments that had normalized ties with Israel. As of mid-2025, Gaza remained in a humanitarian crisis and sporadic conflict continued, making the prospects of a negotiated peace even more remote. Each of these Gaza wars followed a tragic pattern: rocket attacks, Israeli retaliation, civilians caught in between, ceasefires, but no permanent resolution. The blockade of Gaza persisted, meaning even in quiet times, its people lived in what has been described as an open-air prison, with severe shortages of clean water, electricity, and freedom of movement. For Israelis, especially those in towns near Gaza like Sderot, life meant periodic dashes to bomb shelters with only seconds warning of incoming rockets, and a gnawing fear for families living under constant threat. The human cost on both sides further cemented mutual hatred. Yet, even in the darkest of times, there were flashes of humanity. Israeli doctors treating Palestinian patients, Gazan civilians reaching out online to show grief for Israeli losses, etc. But overwhelmingly, repeated Gaza wars deepened the abyss of distrust. While Gaza captured headlines with wars, in the larger West Bank the conflict has persisted in a grinding, daily manner, quieter but deeply entrenched. The West Bank, including East Jerusalem, remains under Israeli occupation since 1967, now spanning well over half a century. Over the years, Israel established a network of settlements, Israeli civilian communities built on lands beyond the 1949 Green Line. As of 2023, more than 700,000 Israeli settlers live in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. These settlements range from small hilltop outposts to sizable towns. They are connected by Israeli-only bypass roads and protected by the Israeli army. Settlements are considered illegal under international law, Fourth Geneva Convention, by the UN and most countries, but Israel disputes this. Successive Israeli governments have supported and subsidized the settlement enterprise, seeing it either as fulfillment of historic/biblical claims or as enhancing security depth. Many settlers also move there for affordable housing, with government incentives. For Palestinians, the settlement expansion has been a relentless encroachment on the land they envision for a future state. By 2020s, approximately 40% of the West Bank is directly controlled by settlements, military zones, or settler roads. Palestinian towns and villages have become isolated enclaves separated by checkpoints, roadblocks, and the sprawling separation barrier that Israel built during the Second Intifada. Daily life for Palestinians in the West Bank is circumscribed by a matrix of Israeli control. To travel from one city to another often requires passing through Israeli checkpoints where queues and inspections are routine. Movement is not freedom of movement, but rather movement by permission. The city of Hebron epitomizes the occupation's microcosm. A few hundred ideological Israeli settlers live in fortified compounds in the heart of this Palestinian city of 200,000, guarded by thousands of soldiers. Entire Palestinian markets and streets in Hebron's old city have been shut down to secure the settlers. Palestinian residents navigate a maze of barricades and checkpoints daily just to reach their homes. Tensions are constant and violence sporadic, settler attacks on Palestinians and vice versa. The Israeli human rights group Selam has documented hundreds of physical obstacles Israel deploys. As of early 2023, there were about 565 roadblocks and checkpoints inside the West Bank controlling Palestinian movement. Every aspect of West Bank life is affected. East Jerusalem, which Palestinians hope to have as their capital, has been effectively annexed by Israel, and its Palestinian residents live under Israeli law as permanent residents, but often face home demolitions if they build illegally, since getting permits from Israeli authorities is extremely difficult. In the rest of the West Bank, Israeli military law prevails. The Palestinian Authority administers city centers, Area A, but Israel frequently conducts night raids to arrest suspected militants, without needing PA consent. The younger Palestinian generation in these areas has grown up knowing only occupation, many having experienced the inside of an Israeli prison or having family who have. One sees the occupation in the looming presence of the concrete wall near Bethlehem or Qalqilia, cutting Palestinians off from their fields. One feels it in the long lines of workers at 4 a.m. at Qalandia checkpoint, waiting to cross into Israel for day labor. One hears it in the stories of farmers who need permits to access their own olive groves trapped behind the separation fence. And one fears it in the sight of soldiers patrolling streets, or the sound of gunfire when clashes erupt between stone-throwing youths and the army. Despite these hardships, about 3 million Palestinians continue to live in the West Bank, excluding East Jerusalem, under occupation alongside the settler population. Many Palestinians practice sumud, or steadfastness, continuing normal life, studying, farming, raising families, in the face of systemic pressures to emigrate or give up. The international community frequently criticizes settlement expansion and human rights violations in the occupied territories. The United Nations regularly passes resolutions affirming the illegality of settlements and calling for an end to the occupation. Yet, without a political solution, the status quo grinds on. For Israelis, the West Bank's biblical names, Judea and Samaria, resonate, and security arguments hold sway. They fear a hostile entity on the hills overlooking Tel Aviv's coastal plain. For Palestinians, the West Bank is the heartland of their history and culture. Nablus, Jenin, Jericho, now dismembered by what they see as colonial takeovers. The checkpoints and walls not only restrict movement, but also, as critics say, restrict the horizon, making hope scarce. Throughout the twists and turns of this conflict's history, the international community has been deeply involved, sometimes as peacemakers, sometimes as partisan backers, and often as witnesses to the tragedy. From the early days, the United Nations played a key role. It proposed the 1947 Partition Plan. It set up relief agencies like UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which to this day supports millions of Palestinian refugees, and it passed numerous resolutions framing the conflict's terms. UNSC Resolution 242 after 1967, for instance, became the basis for Land for Peace. The UN also, in 1974, invited Yasser Arafat to speak and granted the PLO observer status, implicitly recognizing Palestinian national rights. In 2012, the UN General Assembly went further, voting to upgrade Palestine to a non-member observer state, effectively recognizing a state of Palestine on the 1967 lines, despite U.S. and Israeli objections. Yet, UN resolutions remain unfulfilled. They are moral and legal reference points, but are not enforceable without consensus of great powers. The United States has arguably been the most influential external actor. A close ally of Israel since the 1960s, the U.S. provides Israel with extensive military aid and diplomatic backing. Washington repeatedly used its veto power to shield Israel from condemnatory UN Security Council resolutions. American mediation was pivotal at many junctures. President Carter brokered the Egypt-Israel-Camp David Accords in 1978. President Clinton hosted the Oslo signing in 1993 and Camp David 2000. President Bush launched the 2003 roadmap. President Obama tried shuttle diplomacy like the 2013 to 2014 Kerry talks. However, U.S. policy has often been criticized as biased toward Israel. Indeed, Palestinians often view America as Israel's lawyer rather than an honest broker. Nonetheless, no lasting peace seems achievable without U.S. involvement, given its leverage. In recent years, the U.S. under President Trump took unprecedented pro-Israel steps, recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moving the U.S. embassy there in 2018 to Palestinian fury as East Jerusalem's status was supposed to be negotiated, and cutting most aid to Palestinian institutions. Yet, the U.S. also midwifed the Abraham Accords in 2020, a different paradigm of peacemaking between Israel and Arab states that bypassed the Palestinians. The Arab states have been key players from the outset, from fighting in 1948 and 1967 to later negotiating peace. After Egypt's separate peace in 1979, the Arab League eventually, in 2002, put forward the Arab Peace Initiative, offering Israel full normalization with all Arab countries in exchange for a withdrawal to 1967 lines and a just solution for Palestinian refugees. Israel never formally accepted that offer. Over the decades, Arab states like Jordan also made peace. Jordan-Israel Treaty in 1994 established full relations and settled border issues. Jordan, which had controlled the West Bank, relinquished all claims to it in 1988 in favor of the PLO, and today Jordan remains a crucial intermediary and custodian of Muslim holy sites in Jerusalem. The Gulf Arab states historically boycotted Israel, but shifting geopolitics, particularly a shared interest with Israel in countering Iran, led to the groundbreaking Abraham Accords. In 2020, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain normalized relations with Israel, followed by Morocco and Sudan. These agreements were signed at the White House and hailed as a new era of peace, but conspicuously left out the Palestinians, offering them only lip service. While these Arab countries gained benefits, U.S. arms, economic deals, recognition of Moroccan sovereignty in Western Sahara, etc., the Palestinian leadership felt betrayed, seeing fellow Arabs making separate peace while the occupation continued. Other Muslim-majority nations like Turkey and Iran have had their roles. Turkey once had good ties with Israel, then relations soured over Gaza, particularly after the 2010 flotilla incident where Israeli forces killed Turkish activists. Iran, since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, became Israel's fiercest enemy, heavily supporting militant groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas, Islamic Jihad in Palestine with funds and weapons. The Iran-Israel shadow conflict often influences Gaza flare-ups and is a subtext of Israel's urgency in forming alliances with Gulf states who also fear Iran. The European Union and individual European states are significant donors to the Palestinian Authority and advocates of a two-state solution. The EU frequently condemns settlements and home demolitions. Yet Europe's ability to shape events is limited compared to the US, and Israel sometimes bristles at European criticism as interference. Finally, the wider international civil society and movements have become involved, from human rights NGOs documenting abuses to the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, sanctions, launched by Palestinian activists in 2005 urging nonviolent economic pressure on Israel to end the occupation. This campaign gained traction in some academic and cultural circles worldwide, but also sparked intense backlash and accusations that it seeks to delegitimize Israel. In summary, the conflict long ago transcended its local roots to become a global issue, a symbolic battleground involving questions of colonialism, justice, security, and human rights. Efforts at mediation have repeatedly come agonizingly close to peace, or at least to interim breakthroughs, only to falter due to lack of trust, political assassinations, changes in leadership, or extremist spoilers. The two-state solution, Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace, has been the declared goal of the international consensus for nearly 3 decades. Yet as of 2025, it seems more distant than ever. The physical viability of a Palestinian state has been eroded by settlements and fragmentation, and political will on both sides has waned. Some now speak of a coming future of one state, whether that be a binational democracy or, as Palestinians fear, an apartheid-like reality of one state that permanently subjugates them. Others call for renewed commitment to two states with robust international guarantees. As our documentary journey nears its end, the story of the Israel-Palestine conflict remains tragically unfinished. We have traveled from antiquity to the present, from ancient kingdoms and Roman legions, through the rise of Zionism and Arab nationalism amid collapsing empires, through partitions and wars, 1948's independence and Nakba, 1967's occupation, Intifadas, and elusive peace deals. We have seen how both peoples, Jews and Palestinian Arabs, are deeply attached to this same land and how historical traumas have shaped their identities. For Jewish Israelis, the Holocaust and millennia of persecution forged a determination to have a secure homeland at almost any cost. For Palestinians, the Nakba and decades of displacement and occupation have entrenched a resolve to resist dispossession and achieve freedom and statehood. Today, the conflict endures in daily scenes. An Israeli soldier at a checkpoint checking IDs, a Palestinian child in Gaza studying by candlelight because electricity is scarce, an Orthodox Jewish family building a home in a West Bank settlement overlooking a Palestinian village, a mother on each side grieving a son lost to violence. Episodes of hope, the Oslo handshake, the Gaza disengagement, have often given way to new cycles of bloodshed. And yet, voices of peace persist. Israeli and Palestinian bereaved families joining together to demand reconciliation, activists protesting evictions in Sheikh Jarrah or against terrorist attacks, young people on both sides who say, "Enough." The international community, for all its efforts, has not imposed a solution. Ultimately, Israelis and Palestinians themselves must decide how to live together or apart in this narrow land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Will it be two states, Israel and Palestine, sharing Jerusalem and living in peace? That vision, though backed by the UN and many world powers, seems ever harder to realize on the ground? Or will there be continued conflict and perhaps some other political arrangement forced by realities? As of now, Israel remains in control from the river to the sea, except for the tight enclave of Hamas-run Gaza, a status quo punctuated by outbreaks of war. The West Bank occupation and settlement enterprise grind on, while Palestinians, divided between Fatah and Hamas, struggle to present a united front. Meanwhile, changing regional dynamics, like Arab states normalizing with Israel through the Abraham Accords, have altered the conflict's landscape but not resolved its core. The year 2023's horrific violence underscored how dangerous and combustible the situation remains, not just for Israelis and Palestinians, but for the whole region and beyond. And yet, the story is not over. This documentary has spanned thousands of years of history leading to a conflict that, at heart, is about two people seeking dignity, security, and recognition. As viewers, perhaps unfamiliar before with the conflict's long arc, you may now better understand the depth of each side's aspirations and grievances. We have sought to present these events and perspectives neutrally, not to assign blame, but to illuminate why this conflict is so emotional and enduring. In doing so, we hope to humanize those who are often reduced to statistics or stereotypes on the news. In a world troubled by division, the Israel-Palestine conflict stands as a poignant example of how history, when unresolved, can bind people in a tragic embrace. But history is also full of surprises. A century ago, few could imagine an Israeli state or a Palestinian national consciousness as they exist today. Perhaps a century from now, people will look back at our era with astonishment that peace took so long to achieve. As the cameras fade, we end not with answers, but with questions. Can the land of the Holy Land be shared justly? Can the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael, of Sarah and Hagar, the metaphorical brothers, find a path to coexistence? The narrative continues to unfold, written by the choices of leaders and ordinary citizens. The Israel-Palestine conflict's history is indeed long and painful, but it also reminds us that even the deepest wounds can, with courage and empathy, inch toward healing. The final chapters are yet to be written. Let us hope they will be chapters of peace and reconciliation, so that future generations of Israelis and Palestinians may narrate a very different story, one not of conflict, but of mutual understanding and lasting peace. Thank you for watching, and for staying with us through such a dense and emotional topic. We know 90 minutes are not enough to cover every nuance, every life, every event that deserves attention. We apologize for what we could not include. If you found this documentary insightful, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with others. Your support helps us continue creating thoughtful, balanced explorations of complex global issues. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and may peace prevail.